prepared speakers. While you're passing, Susan, are you getting all the votes? Okay. Susan will tally all the votes. We'll announce the winners of the topics later. So, is it all right if we get right into our prepared speeches?
Yeah.
Okay. We are very fortunate to have I call her a fairly new member, but it's probably been over a year now.
It's been over a year.
Over a year, wow. Erin Godley is the mother of 3 boys, 2 of whom are teenagers, that she homeschools. She has since developed a passion for kids in education. She is doing speech number 6 from the Competent Communicator Manual. So what is that for the new people? That's a basic manual you get of 10 speaking projects. She's on speaking project number 6, so let's give her a hand for that. Her speech title, 5 to 7 minutes long, Madam Timer. Title, Do You Know Your Own Strength? Erin Godley. Superwoman.
Know my own strength. Do you know your own strength? I didn't. You might be wondering what the heck I'm talking about, because I'm actually not talking about pushing this thing over to the side. What I am talking about is what happened a couple of years ago when my middle son came to me and he said one day, hey, I want to homeschool. And I said, okay, cool, we can try it. I didn't know anything about homeschooling, but we didn't really have a lot of great options in what we wanted to do for our schooling. So we went on this journey, and I'll give you sort of the abbreviated version of it, which was we signed up for a public school curriculum. And in that, I was teaching him, I started teaching him these things. I'd have to sit down and have to teach him algebra and grammar trees. Does anyone remember those?
Diagramming?
Diagramming sentences. I didn't remember that. And I was doing, as an adult, I was teaching him this, and I was like, what the heck is this? When is he ever going to use this? And he was coming to me when I was teaching algebra, and he was going, when am I ever going to use this? We were past basic algebra because there are many uses for that. But when you get into, I don't know, plotting algebraic equations on graphs, and I was like, you're never going to use this. So we scrapped all of the traditional curriculum, and I started looking around and reading a lot of different books to find out a lot of different methods of teaching. And what I came across was just sort of, well, what's going to be useful? How am I going to prepare this person for life? And I read this book by this woman named Jennifer Fox, and it's called Your Child's Strengths. And her whole basis of this book is that every person has an innate strength that they're really good at. It's not your basic like, oh, I'm good at math, or I'm good at art, or I'm good at soccer. It's sort of digging a little bit deeper into that. Well, what do you love? What's your passion? And why do you love it? So I had my son, who was 13-ish at the time, who was not very athletically gifted at all. He didn't really have any passion that I could see. And he sort of sat on the couch all day and he read. And he loved to read. And what I did is I came to him one day, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, what am I going to do with someone who loves to read? You can't make any money when you read. What do you do? So I went to him and I said, hey, what are 5 things that you do that make you feel the most alive? What is it that you do that you love and it just really pops you out of your head and you really find joy in life? And the number one thing that he said, without any hesitation, he said, I love a good story. And I took a step back and I evaluated that. I said, well, what is that? Well, somebody whose passion then is they love to create this story. They love to be involved in a story, and that's why he read. And this kid will sit and he will read 5 to 7 books in a day. No joke. He'll get a stack of books from the library. He'll come home, and within 2 hours, he's read the first 3, 4 books, and he can tell you everything that happens in them, and he remembers them and can quote them. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at him and I was like, wow, this is really amazing. Let me follow that passion that he has. Let me see what happens with that. So then I let him read and I let him get into these stories. And from there, this really amazing thing happened, which was he started creating his own stories. and he started coming up with his own really creative ideas, and I, not being a very creative person at all, was very, very impressed by this. And I sat there with him and I went, okay, this could be something, because I could think of 20 different careers that he could get as a result of just being allowed to explore his creativity, versus me forcing algebra down his throat or forcing some other education that might not really translate for him. And the whole point is, in a public education system, what they do is they go in and they test for weaknesses. This is sort of this woman's theory in this book. They go in and they say, okay, well here, I'm going to test you, I'm going to grade you. What are you weak in? Oh, you're weak in math. We're going to give you tons more math. Let's just ignore the fact that you love history and you're obviously very inclined towards it. We're going to correct all your math so that you're just like everybody else and you fit into this band in our society that you're supposed to be in. So since I was doing away with all of that with my son, I was letting him explore this. And it's really turned into an amazing journey for me, because in that's actually how I ended up at Toastmasters, believe it or not. I don't know if anyone was there the first time that I came, but I said, they asked, okay, what are you doing here? And I said, well, my son is, in addition to being very creative, he's also pretty gifted when it comes to speaking in front of people, and I had wanted to help him find his passion. So I found out he couldn't join, so I said, okay, fine, I'll join. And I ended up loving it because it unlocked creativity within myself, which I thought was the second part. It's the bonus when you're helping someone else explore their own passion. Because what I found is that when I read that, I took a step back and I went, well, wait a minute, what's my passion? What's my strength? What am I good at? And I actually didn't know, and I didn't know how to answer that. And I had to start sort of reevaluating my own life. And from there, it took me on this journey to all sorts of different things. Now I've restructured my whole career. I'm researching all different kinds of things that I found my own passion. So I found it to be a very interesting thing. And the thing that I love the most about it is when you have people who are doing something that they love. I mean, I'm sure most people know this, especially if you work, if you work with people. When people are doing something that they love, they excel at it. They do so much better than if you take someone who doesn't love what they're doing and you stick them in some job that they have to do. They're never going to do as well. So now my whole outlook on life is sort of, well, what is my strength? What is my passion? What's that person's passion? So that I can help guide my kids into their own passions, and then also help other people and myself to find our own passion. And I think from doing that everyone is a lot happier and things flow a little bit better. So my question for everyone is, do you know your own strength?
Wow, thank you, Erin. I didn't know that story. And I know my strength. I think I can move this. How come she moved it a lot easier?
I am pretty strong.
She's a mom. She can do everything with one hand. And hold a child on her hip.
And bring him to the
Intro or just okay. We'll take a moment. Now here's a kind of a cool thing about Toastmasters. All of you members know, but take a moment to give some instant feedback, a comment to our speaker. We'll take a few minutes. You have a red card there. Just write down how you thought she did and pass it over. You get instant feedback in Toastmasters. Oh, we need to. In fact, I'll brag on Toastmasters to our actors. Where's Madison? Is she here in the back? There you go. I'll brag on Toastmasters to actors and any artists or people that create things. You know, especially actors, you have to. Oh, thank you, Kathy. Let there be light. You know, some people will write for years a book or something, and then take years to get feedback on it. Or they'll do a play and they'll wait. It'll take a long time to get feedback. In Toastmasters, you give a speech, you get instant feedback from the audience. because of our comments, but also later you'll see in our coaching section. Now, our next speaker, speaker number 2, we have John Taussig. He's an attorney, a good guy attorney. We have a couple good guy attorneys in the house. John is one of my favorite Toastmasters. You know, every Toastmaster, when you're assigned to do what I'm doing, like run the meeting, you're supposed to come up with a theme. We didn't quite do that today, but John was Toastmaster last Sunday at Renaissance, and his theme was the Beatles. Oh, Susan is picking up the wonderful thing, and we got to hear. I didn't know he was such a Beatles fan. Lots of history. I don't know what he's going to speak on today. You know, normally the speaker will give you an introduction, but he said just wing it. Introduce me. So a great guy, John Taussig. He's going to speak for 5 to 7 minutes with the title.
The title is The French Detective.
The French Detective, John Taussig. 5 to 7 minutes.
I have a story for you this morning. Would you like to hear a story?
Yes.
Well, stories may be either true, or of course they may be fictions. So which would you rather hear?
Fiction.
Either.
True.
True.
Tell me it's
Okay.
true.
Well, I can't go on, and I can't go
Lie
on.
to us.
How about fiction based upon
Lie
a
to
true
us.
story?
All right, well, I have here a true story, but of course, truth can be stranger than fiction, so we'll all win this. In the 1880s, Robert Ledru was a famous detective with the Parisian police force. He was only 35 at the time of the story, but he'd already established a name for himself. He'd broken up a black magic cult. He'd broken up gangs of anarchists in Paris. Most famously of all, he'd rounded up the French members of an organization called Brotherhood of Social Order. And this was an underground political group that sought to overthrow government and dominate the world. And in doing so, Ledru had interviewed, investigated people from lawyers and doctors and bankers in Paris down to street sweepers and pickpockets and really the dregs of society. And he had not hesitated to arrest those at whatever level they might happen to be. And he'd earned a reputation for his unswerving desire to solve crimes. In 1887, Ledru was stressed, and it's believed that he was suffering from syphilis. And his superiors in the Parisian police force sent him out on a relatively easy task. He was sent out to Le Havre, which is a coastal port on the English Channel, to investigate the disappearance of some sailors. Shortly after arriving there, however, he received a telegram from Paris changing his marching orders. He was to investigate now a murder that had occurred in Le Havre. So he reported into the Le Havre constabulary, police there, and they filled him in on what was happening. A man who owned a dressmaking store in Paris had been vacationing on the shore there for reasons of his health. His name was André Monet. He had been found dead on the beach in the morning. He had been shot during the night. A single bullet fired at close range had gone right through him. There were no real suspects, and there was no real idea of what the motive could have been. Ledru goes down to the beach where the incident had occurred in the night. He finds footprints leading to and away from the body there. And he looks at the footprints very carefully. He takes out his magnifying glass and he looks at these footprints. And he orders that what are they called? Casts be made of the footprints. And these are done, and these are brought to him. And he takes these casts over to the far end of the beach, and he is seen studying these casts. He's seen gazing at these casts as if they might reveal something to him. He went home, The next morning he goes back to the La Havre police station, and they have found the bullet. I'd like to see that. This will be the missing piece of evidence, he says to the police there. And he sees the bullet. And he catches the next train back to Paris. And he goes in to see his superiors there, report to his superior. I have solved the murder, he says. I know who did it. Je l'ai fait. I did it. So the fellow, the victim, was shot with a German pistol. I own a German gun. In fact, it is my gun that did this. And he pours out the story of this man on the beach who was found shot there. And he explains how he had noticed the morning after the incident. He had seen that his socks were on the floor and that they were damp and that they were sandy. And he noticed that the footprints in the beach showed that the person was missing his right toe. And Ledru, in fact, did not have his right toe. And he also noticed, he looked at his gun after he had started his investigation of this, and he saw that a round had been fired from his gun. The chamber was missing a bullet. He says, I don't know exactly what happened out there in the beach. Maybe there was some argument or something like that, but I don't believe that I knew what I was doing during this crime. I did not have any intention of doing it. I think that I was sleepwalking and that I did this in a trance. And he says, I am a sick, sick man, and I could do this again, and therefore I am asking that you arrest me right away and you place me in some sort of condition where I won't be able to do this again. Well, his superiors found this to be an utterly incredible story. There was no motive at all for it. It just didn't add up at all. It didn't make any sense. So they put the guy in a cell for the night, and he was seen by the guards watching him to be walking around, apparently asleep, and to be raving. The next night, they give him a gun, but it's unloaded. It just has blanks in the chamber. And he gets up again, and he's walking around, and he aims the gun and fires it at the guards. So with this, they finally believe that this must have been the case. Now, at the time, there was very little data on sleepwalking, and the idea of somebody sleepwalking and killing somebody in their sleep was quite extraordinary. But since then, of course, there's been a lot of, well, not of course, but there has been a lot of research and investigation and documented instances of people doing very odd things in their sleep. Baking cakes, playing the piano, carrying on conversations. And yes, even at least 50 documented instances where people have killed others while sleepwalking. So Ledru was taken away to a farmhouse in a rural part of France. And he was kept there. He was given full pension. He was kept there under guards with nurses who were attending him. So there he is, Robert Ledru, the detective who caught himself.
Thank you. John Tosick.
Wow. Susan's gonna shut the door, and I think we turn the radio.
Excellent speech. We haven't heard, that's a new speech here, right?
Well, I gave it.
Gave it, I must have missed it. Okay, please take a moment to send John Tosick a comment on his speech. And we have one more speaker prepared to speak. If he wants to stay. So, some pencils and pens going. Susan will take the comments and pass them to John.
Thank you.
So I'll explain a little bit about the manual again that you get when you join. You get a basic manual of 10 speaking projects called the Basic Manual. Competent Communicator Manual. When you finish it, you are a CC or a competent communicator. But what do you do when you finish? Oh, here it is. What do you do when you finish this manual of 10 speaking? You've done your 10 speeches.
I don't know, what do you do?
Thank you, Debbie. Well, there's what's called advanced manuals. And do we have any advanced?
Yes, here you go.
Oh, here's one right here. Special occasion speeches. There are, I think, about 10 advanced manuals. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Richard. I just have a question for Lance. Is it bad form to check scores in between speeches?
Check scores.
Yeah.
Oh, like
I got like MLB on my phone and
Yeah, don't do it.
don't do it. Wait till we're excused.
The
Oh,
game- the game is dying.
Clippers?
I'm dying
No,
too.
MLB, baseball, do MLB, Major League Baseball.
Oh,
Get
yeah,
your-
yeah.
Get,
yeah.
get your,
Okay.
And your phone rings every time there's a score. So someone.
Oh,
I got all the beepers turned off.
are you okay?
Yeah. Frank is pitching, for God's sakes.
Oh, yes. Okay, well, all right, we'll go quick.
So don't worry.
Yeah. So anyway, there's advanced manuals, and a lot of our speakers here at Renaissance Speakers have done the advanced manuals, and you know, there's just higher and higher levels. In
That's
fact,
right,
you've
it's
heard of the art of public speaking?
yes.
Well, you can take a speech to an art form, and we're fortunate tonight to give you an example of that, because our next speaker is giving an advanced manual speech, and I actually should start off now by saying we have a guest here tonight, and it's a special guest. His name is Thomas Paine. You've heard of him in history. Thomas Paine was an English-American political activist, philosopher, political theorist, and revolutionary. One of the founding fathers of the United States, he authored the two most influential pamphlets at the start of the American Revolution. He inspired the rebels in 1776 to declare independence from Britain. We are so fortunate to have Mr. Paine here tonight, aka Jeff Harman, who is giving an advanced speech. Thomas Paine, please welcome him with his speech titled The American Crisis. Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So happy to be here tonight. And thank you, Richard, for inviting me. Now, as Richard was saying, I'm best remembered for some pamphlets I wrote, late 18th century. It was Common Sense, Age of Reason, Rights of Man, among other things. Now, Common Sense was published in January 1776. And in it, I explained in clear and simple language the advantages of and the need for immediate independence from Great Britain. Now, this booklet sold thousands and thousands of copies, very popular, and it seemed to have helped the cause, because we all know what happened in July of that year, do we not?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
You're welcome. So, the point here is that I'm best known as a writer. And Toastmasters is all about public speaking. So, when Richard asked me to talk about that subject, I had to think about it. But I did come up with something. Did you know that there was a time when one of my writings was read aloud as if in a speech? It happened 2 days before Christmas, 1776. Let me explain. Late in 1776, the war was not going well. In 21 months of fighting, we had not won a single notable victory. In fact, we were on the run. We'd been driven out, the Continental Army with General George Washington, we'd been driven out of New York, out of New Jersey, across the Delaware, into Pennsylvania. And at this point, we were encamped 35 miles or so from Philadelphia. Things were so bleak that General Washington had sent a dispatch to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia that they should evacuate the city at once. Bad times indeed. So, at that time, I was an aide to General Greene. And he and the other generals had insisted that the best way I could contribute to the cause for my country was by being a writer, not by being a fighter. I was not a very good soldier, actually. They discouraged me from that activity. So, with their permission, I walked to Philadelphia. Why? Because that's where the printing presses were. And believe me, it was not a pleasant journey. I was on foot, constantly looking over my shoulder because fearing capture at any moment. Because the British knew very well I was Mr. Common Sense. Not well liked at all. When I got to Philadelphia, though, the town was in chaos. News of defeat after defeat had frightened everyone. I could see the melancholy and deplorable condition that people were in. Morale had collapsed. People were afraid to speak, almost to think. Printing presses stopped. The only thing in circulation were fears and falsehoods. I mean, you could see the British army across the river, ready to invade at a moment's notice and force a surrender. Continental Congress had already fled to Baltimore. So I did what I do best. I wrote. I knew exactly what my fellow Americans needed to hear this time of invasion and terror. A time I called the American crisis. I attacked with words the greatest weapon Britain had in its favor. Fear. Everywhere they looked, Americans found reasons to be afraid. Afraid of what the Redcoats might do to them, their families, their possessions. Afraid of losing their English empire, their English citizenship. Afraid of what this new homemade government might do. Why, thank God, I fear not. I saw no real cause for fear. I knew our situation well, and I could see the way out of it. I wrote that this revolution was for a cause far greater than any disagreement over taxes. I promised to bring reason to their ears, and in a language as plain as ABC, hold up the truth to their eyes. December 19, I found a printer. It's not easy, but I did. We printed The American Crisis. It's a small pamphlet, 8 pages in length. We sold 18,000 copies in the first week. All the profits to the army, of course. And it seemed to do some good as well. Enlistments went up. There were more donations of food and supplies from the locals coming in. Now, General Washington had been considering some sort of bold move ever since arriving in Pennsylvania. He decided he would lead the army across the Delaware River, march 9 miles south to Trenton, attack the German mercenaries called Hessians that were encamped there. On December 23, General Washington ordered all of his officers to gather their men together in small groups and to read aloud the words of the American crisis. It began like this. These are the times that drive in souls. The summer soldier, sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service to the country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we had this consolation with us, that the greater the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness alone is worth everything. The men prepared for 2 days. On dusk and Christmas night, under cover of darkness, with an army of boats, we moved the men across the ice-filled Delaware River to the other side. By 3 a.m., 2,400 men were there. From there, they inched their way south. Many of the men leaving footprints of blood in the snow with bare feet. A 9-mile trek through a blizzard. We arrived at daybreak. Encountered 1,500 Hessians sleeping soundly. We mounted a 3-pronged attack with musket, bayonet, and cannon. The men screaming, "These are the times that drive men's souls!" We're so proud of that. After a brief and intense fight, the Hessians surrendered. We took nearly 1,000 prisoners, and much of the supplies which we so desperately needed. This victory was proof that we could defeat these German mercenaries and might have a chance against King George after all. And for you tonight, an example of the power of spoken word. Now, I didn't come here tonight only to speak about my words from the past. We came here to talk about your words in the future. The world should hear from you. So learn how to use those words. Hear it out loud. Richard.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Pretty close to July 4th coming around, or fairly close. Wow, please take a moment to send Mr. Paine and Jeff Harman a comment. I'll bring my sock drawer back out. And we will get into the instant feedback portion of the meeting where all the speakers, the 3 speakers will hear an instant feedback of their speeches and coaching. Oh, Madam Timer, how did the speakers do? Did they come in on time, or would you please stand and Debbie Ellis.
Thank you. I'll be here next Tuesday. Everybody qualified.
So they can all be voted on as
So
best
if you want to
speaker.
vote for somebody for best speaker, you can vote for any of the 3. That would be Aaron, or John, or Jeff/Thomas.
All right, so they can now make a quick comment and vote at the same
That is
time.
correct.
That's multitasking. Yes.
That's yours.
Yes.
Do we vote on the same
We've
piece of
already
paper?
introduced.
Yes.
Doesn't
matter.
Yes.
No, do it again.
So much the first time.
Well, I didn't get to hear. I just went out of the room.
He needs to come to the
Okay.
I'll do it.
Okay, now I'd like to bring up on the stage the multitasking woman that is your club coach, and I'm going to introduce ballot counter and a good friend of mine, Susan Stewart, who will lead the educational portion of the meeting and the club coaching. Susan Stewart.
Just wanted to make sure I had an agenda up here to go by. All right,
So continue to pass your ballots and your comments forward, and Richard will put them on the chair here, and I will sort them out in between. So at this point, we have a section of the meeting where we get some feedback. And each of the speakers has been assigned a coach who will coach, and each speaker was speaking from a particular manual and a particular project within that manual. So they will be coaching per what they were working on in that particular manual. And they may coach more than that if it's somebody who's a more experienced speaker. So to begin with, we have a very experienced coach and long-term Toastmaster and another attorney, Doug Crowder, who will be coaching for Aaron Godley.
Thank you, Susan, fellow Toastmasters, honorable guests, and most of all, Aaron. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is the Competent Communicator Manual, and it has 10 speech topics in it. And once you complete the 10 topics, you become a competent communicator. And each of these topics is designed to teach you a different skill. For example, the first one is the icebreaker, and it's just to teach you how to start speaking to an audience. And then the second one is how to organize your speech. Now, Aaron, your mission, should you choose to accept it, which you did choose to accept, was Project 6, Vocal Variety. The objectives of which were to use voice volume, pitch, rate, and quality to reflect and add meaning and interest to your message, to use pauses to enhance your message, and to use vocal variety smoothly and naturally. So, I think this was a pass. What do you all think?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, Aaron, let me talk about three things at least. I liked a number of things about your speech, but let me just focus on 3 things you did quite well. The first was that the message fits in with the theme tonight. Now, no one really said there was a particular theme, but there was talk during the table topics about superheroes. So you were actually fitting in well with superheroes because you were actually a superhero when you decided to homeschool your son. And you were a superhero when you found out what his passion was and what his strength was, and also what your own strength was. And the second thing that I thought you did well, your voice had a pleasant quality to it. It wasn't like you were speaking at us, it was like you were speaking to us and you were actually having a conversation with us. And so that was quite good because it was a pleasant speech and we could relate to it. Now the third thing you talked about, beforehand you had asked me, I'd asked you like what you wanted coaching on, and you said, well, you weren't really very well prepared, but actually that didn't come across at all because to me it seemed like you were quite well prepared, and you said that you wanted to give a coherent speech. You did that because you had the theme going through the speech. Now one thing that I think you could have improved on, and if you do this speech again, and many people do go through the Competent Communicator Manual many times. Richard Stewart's probably been through it 17 times at least. How many times, Richard?
Oh, at least a dozen, and
Okay.
I'm still learning.
Well, everyone can still learn, and I sort of lost count a few times ago. But nonetheless, if you do happen to do vocal variety again, what you could do, especially with this speech, is you could have a little bit more vocal variety by imitating your son a little bit, or imitating some of the characters in his speech. I mean, in one of the stories he could read. Like, for example, you could say he was reading a story about someone who said, "You are a traitor and a rebel spy," or something like that. Overall, it was a great speech. I learned a lot from it, and I decided to start looking for what my passion is in life.
Yeah.
All right. So next, coaching for John Tossey, we have Naomi Connors.
Good evening, everyone. John was doing speech number 2, project number 2, from that same Competent Communicator Manual that Doug just spoke about. The objectives in this speech are to select an outline, and it gives a number of different types of outlines that you can use. It goes into detail about those. so that the listeners can easily follow and understand what he's saying. He's to make his message clear, using supporting material that contributes to his message. In this instance, I think, John, it was more of an entertaining speech than it was one with a message, but it was still incredibly valuable. It was then to use appropriate transitions when moving from one idea to another and to create a strong opening and conclusion. So this is really looking at how you put your speech together and whether or not your audience is going to be able to follow it easily. John, you did an outstanding job. It looks at the preparation and organization, whether there was a body, an opening, a body, and a conclusion to his speech, how the transitions were they smooth or not, and absolute high value on all of these things. This was the speech value here was, I found it to be an incredibly interesting story. You are an amazing storyteller, and I've heard many of John's speeches, but this was one of your best. I really enjoyed this. I was completely mesmerized throughout the thing. I remind myself that I was coaching you. So, again, a wonderful storyteller. Your opening, you instantly engage the audience with a really neat trick that speakers can use, and that is by asking questions and getting feedback. And the thing that you did so well here was you handled that feedback. You not only asked the questions, but you actually were listening to what they were saying. So I thought you did very well there. The body of your speech, this story, what a great story. I love detective stuff. So I was totally engaged. It was very logical, it was easy to follow. The transitions were very smooth as you went from venue to venue and had conversation to conversation. There was one slight moment where I wasn't sure who was talking, but you handled it. Immediately I knew right after that it was the main character. And your ending. Talk about a punchline, the detective who caught himself. I will never forget this speech. I will never forget this story because that punchline was so dramatic. It was really good. So, all in all, a really terrific job. Now, what could you do differently moving forward to maybe enhance this particular speech again? John, no introduction? You're a Toastmaster, John. Introductions are really important when you're giving a speech, because you want to establish your credibility. Did you read this book? Did you hear about it somewhere else? Are you really into detective stories and mysteries and things like that? Anything that could have been put into that opening for the Toastmaster to introduce you that would have given you a little more credibility here would have enhanced the speech. It didn't detract from it, certainly, but introductions are really important. And just one moment of fiddling with your papers, a little leaning on the lectern, which I think gave us a little bit of nervousness there, but other than that, the whole thing was really interesting and smooth and wonderful, and I loved it. I want to hear more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naomi. We need to adjust this a little this way so we have more space past each other over there. All right, and our final coach for this morning is Kathy Oliver for Thomas Paine, Jeff Harman.
This is as much a surprise to me as it might be to you that I'm coaching Jeff. But Jeff, what I have to say is you are an absolute consummate speaker and performer. It's like Richard said, you take speech giving and speechifying is what we call it sometimes in Renaissance speakers, and take it up to such a high level of an art form. If you are so comfortable in doing what you're doing, you really are communicating to us in the voice of Thomas Paine. It's like there's no Jeff Harman there when you're talking to us, when you're doing this performance. There's just Thomas Paine, and that's a really difficult thing to do. Over the years, as I've watched actors and liked actors and disliked other actors, my toughest criteria for an actor is have they stopped being themselves and have they started being that person that they're supposed to be portraying on the screen or whatever it is. And Jeff, you do that so well. That's really a really high level skill. There isn't a whole lot that I could coach you on in terms of improvement. Just a little bit of body language. It would be about the only thing I could think of. I said, I know that probably Thomas Paine might have had a stature like this, holding his hands behind him. but it kind of gives you a little tiny bit of a back off from your audience. And again, it's part of the persona, it's part of the character, but just give it just a little bit more of a relaxed body, and maybe having your hands at your side sometimes, or even, doing a Napoleon kind of thing, whatever you have to do, because the outfit really contributes to what you're doing and your presentation and your performance. It's way beyond a speech, it's a performance. So that's really about the only thing that I can suggest in terms of improvement. Otherwise, just an outstanding job. We saw this speech recently at Renaissance Speakers, and we were all thrilled with it and so impressed. And once again, greatly impressed and greatly thrilled to see you do this. And I know he's planning on a series of these speeches for us, continuous series for us at Renaissance Speakers. So you have to come and visit to see another one, or maybe we can coach to convince him to come back to this Toastmasters Club and do it again. So thank you very much. It was very, very enjoyable.
Thank you, Kathy. So could we please have a timer's report at this point?
Of course you can. Everybody qualified. Doug Crowder, Naomi Connors, Kathy Oliver. Vote.
Please vote, and Richard's going to